Good evening. My name is Anne-Marie Grant. I'm the Executive Director at the American Foundation for the University of the West Indies. Today, we're delighted to introduce the ebook, Jamaica Post-Colonial Struggles for Dignity, Equity, and Development, authored by Wilberne Persaud. It's a collection of selected columns covering the period 1976 to 2013. Happily, we have the author, Wilberne Persaud, to talk with us this evening. The material covered in this book is truly a panoramic view of our Jamaican economy and society since independence in 1962. It's been described as a treasure trove of Persaud's published and unpublished writings, made easily accessible between two covers. It is enhanced by an array of photographs, which alone provides the reader with visual images of actors and lived landscape of modern Jamaica. Jamaica Post-Colonial Struggles has 139 columns, 113 images, and fill a book of 347 pages. The images alone are well worth your time. My guest this evening is Wilberne Persaud, renowned economist, former senior lecturer and head of the Department of Economics at the University of the West Indies, MONA. We are delighted to have Wilberne Persaud.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
I am fine, thank you. After those beautiful words, I look forward to our discussion this evening.
Great. So, Wilberne, we have heard a little bit about a lot that you have done in your short life. Why did you write this book?
Life is short indeed, but we want to make the most of it. I didn't sit down and write a book. This is a collection of columns, which I was almost cajoled into doing by a friend. A colleague, her name is Cecilia Karsh-Brathwaite, sociologist, developmental sociologist, who read some of my columns, thought they were very useful, and that they explained economic issues in a way which she, at her university in California, did not find that easy to grasp. So she said I should do it. I didn't want to, but then she said, listen, give me your archives, I'll choose some stuff and we'll work with it. And that's how it came about. Now, I could go on to say simply that the reason for writing the columns in the first place was an attempt, pardon me, to get clarity for the various problems that were occurring in Jamaica during that period, in the 1970s and beyond. So it began by just letters to the editor and so on, and then it came to a column first with the Observer, then with the Gleaner and the Financial Gleaner.
Well, thank you for answering what would have been my next question, because what I also wanted to ask as a segue to that is, what single substantive issue inspired you to write these columns?
Well, I wrote several columns on issues that were of interest, like macroeconomic policy. We had a devaluation earlier on, but then there was an argument in Jamaica about maternity leave. The private sector and the employers were against the idea, and so were some of the political class. Now, in my view, the discussion was so unfocused and nonsensical. I took a lot of time. In those days, we didn't have computers as yet. It would take weeks to get such a column done, because you'd have to get the material from the Statistical Institute, etc. But my issue was the cost of providing maternity leave, which means the bonding between the newborn and the child. That's nothing compared to the mayhem which can be created as a result of having children who are not properly nourished and nurtured from the beginning. So that's what set it off. And then I was asked to continue writing a column. I didn't want to, but I did. So that's how it started.
Now, since we're on the subject of healthcare, maternity leave, my next question is, in the book, you have a interesting topic which says how facts got lynched in the US healthcare debate. And it attempts to unearth and unpack the issues that were swirling around at the time as it relates to the USA Affordable Care Act under the then Obama administration. As you know, currently the Trump White House administration is in the court still trying to overturn fundamental elements of the Affordable Care Act. How much progress do you think has been made in this area, in Jamaica in particular? And what similarities do you still see between the controversies and the conversation when you wrote the column and today's issues?
Well, the healthcare issue for the United States of America, the only word I can best choose to describe it, it is obnoxious. Yes, this is the richest country the world has ever known. It has some of the best facilities for medical procedures, but those procedures are for the wealthy. It is nonsensical, and this COVID-19 has laid it bare. Yes? Now, a society cannot operate on the basis of you take all and you give nothing. There's something called the tragedy of the commons. So that if everyone uses a park, but no one is tasked to maintain it, that's the tragedy. It'll be destroyed rather quickly.
Yes.
So if you look at the pandemic now, you see some of the issues. To get back to Jamaica, or to get to Jamaica, because that column wasn't on Jamaica at all. It was on the USA. There was a time when healthcare was more readily available. Then we follow the US in so many things. The pity is we choose to follow them in some of the worst things that they do. We don't follow them in the best. We don't follow them at the times when maybe levels of corruption are so great, and these issues are taken up, people are prosecuted, etc. Now, at this moment in the US, we're talking about a totally different scene. We're not getting into that right now. That would take the whole program away. But yes, it was something to behold. And what you will notice is, in the situation of the USA, it was basically political power that people were trying to achieve, with no reference whatsoever to the working people of the country, without whom it can't progress.
Interestingly, as we think about some of those issues that affect economic and social development, not only of Jamaica, but also of the Caribbean region, your columns, many of which have some very interesting and fulsome critique of some of the economic policies which were being pursued then. What are the major factors which you think contributed to some of the major economic failures that Jamaica experienced during the period 1976 to 2013? We're talking about almost 40 years of existence.
Yes, well, that span makes it difficult to grasp the whole quickly. But the first issue is the impact of the colonial economic system. So when you become independent and you make that break, systems do not change. So these things have to be consciously attempted. This is one of the issues. So in the colonial system, the colonies were the purveyors of raw material. And there's a column in the first part on the industrialization of the British West Indies. Now, this was something which was first raised by Arthur Lewis, our first Nobel laureate, who became principal of the University College of the West Indies, and then vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies when it became independent of London University. And his Nobel Prize was basically for a beautiful piece he did on development economics called Economic Development with Unlimited Supplies of Labor. So his thing was, we have some unique characteristics which would be very useful for us if we were to create industrial activity in the Caribbean for export essentially to the USA. And he had a set of objectives and mechanisms to have this work properly. Now, the thing is, the way I described that to my students was as if you had a beautiful piece of architecture, fantastic architect, fantastic engineers who designed everything. Then you gave it to the builders. The builders simply dumped the designs and built what they wanted to do. Some of it because of corruption. My understanding is, I wasn't there at the time it happened, but I understand that one minister was called Mr. 10%. I don't know what that meant. But the point is, all of the pitfalls that Arthur Lewis saw and warned against, we fell into. And therefore, that led to some serious problems. The other parts of it, with the same colonial system, was the way in which trade is organized. I don't know if you may have another question on the trade issue, so I won't go into that at this moment.
Well, let's stay on the subject of the economy of Jamaica, and it would have been a microcosm of the larger Caribbean space.
Yeah.
And in the book, in one of the columns, you cite the differential in development and productivity between Jamaica and two of the other smaller Caribbean islands, in particular the Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados. Share with us from your statements and what you wrote about in your columns, what conclusions you were able to come to for that existence.
Okay. Productivity essentially captures ratios. You have inputs, and those inputs are worked together and they create outputs. So what you want to look at is the way in which your economy handles its inputs and the kind of productivity that you get from the way inputs are handled. Now, research work for Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago compared to Jamaica showed at the time that the productivity of Jamaica lagged behind the other two significantly. There are several reasons for this. Part of it is there was an expenditure in Jamaica for which there is no line item. It is called protection money. So that if you're putting up some buildings, and whoever it is, whether, I don't know, the Don, the protector, whoever it is, comes, there is assess placed on that activity, which is never in the books. So that when you look at the quantum of investments taking place and the output, that is where you have the productivity drop. There's another thing too, that at the time, I haven't looked at numbers recently, but I'm sure it'll remain the same. you find that as government debt increases, in a situation in which the economic activities are mature, they've been going for a long time, they're not innovating, you find the productivity tends not to be what it ought to be, what it can be. And specific interventions are needed in those situations.
So in an economy that is significantly dependent on, let's say, tourism, that has been the backbone and the breadwinner for the majority of the people, in the absence of innovation, creativity, and additional opportunities, it is going to remain stagnant and lack the sort of movement that one would want to identify for progress, is what you're saying.
In part, tourism, as we all know, is a beautiful activity. We don't look at London and the UK and say it's a tourist economy. But let me tell you, they make a massive amount of money on tourism. When you go to London and you see the Bobby or the guard ramrod straight, the fly, he doesn't touch him, he doesn't slap it. People go to see that. They love it. Now, the thing about Jamaica and tourism is that the tourism has developed in a way which does not necessarily achieve the greatest good for the largest number of people in the country. And just take one idea. There's a need for sustainability of tourism, particularly in the current situation. What we would need to do is to have the tourism sector as much as possible integrated with some of the rest of the economy, instead of being enclaves where you find migration from other parts to the outskirts of the tourism areas, because there's economic activity there.
Yes. Yes.
Then you have the all-inclusives. There was a time when the provisioning of the tourism sector did not require Jamaican output. That has changed significantly. I know now some of the big resorts, they have contracts with local farmers and so, which are good developments. But there is still more that can be done so that Jamaica as a whole, more of the people benefit. So for instance, there could be stuff done with respect to the Blue Mountains. You could have cableways. There are lots of things which can be done.
As we seek to explore different economic models and the one that best suits small island developing nations, in one of the columns, you talked a little bit about the best Jamaican, the best model for an economy like Jamaica. And I just want to find out from you, would you identify any of the two popular economic models, whether it be from Friedman or from Keynes, as associated specifically with Jamaica? And if so, why so? And if not, why not?
Okay. Well, Milton Friedman is associated with laissez-faire, where a corporation is beholden only to its shareholders. That is one view. I do not share that view. I honestly think it's a nonsensical view. You can't run your show as if it's only your shareholders whom you have. You have workers, you have the environment in which you operate, you have consumers, etc. And companies are beginning to understand this, have begun to understand this. You also have the link between the legal system of capitalism, because without the limited liability company, capitalism could not exist.
Interesting.
Beginning in the United Kingdom with these massive companies like the East India Company, the Dutch West India Company, etc. You had the capacity of small holders of wealth to link together, and you have large operations. That's fine. And capitalism is an amazing system, which through innovation in all kinds of ways, technological change as well, and technological change is not only physical stuff. You change mechanisms, like you come to your computers now, and so on. So the models which have been used for Jamaica tend to be more of the Keynesian macroeconomic type, yes, than the Friedman laissez-faire. But remember, this is being effected, implemented, run first under a system of neocolonialism, and then second, where you have Reagan, Thatcher, and what was called the Washington Consensus. So this is what people have christened the neoliberal strategy. So that Jamaica is operating in the world economy. It has trade relationships. It has difficulties with its foreign exchange availability and cost. And it seeks to do very good things. In the 1970s, Jamaica sought to do some very good things to improve the condition of the working class. It was 1938, which is when the uprisings began, yes, and an attempt at reforming the way in which those societies operated. I mean, the women used to be breaking stones, rocks, and sometimes they had to offer benefits to people, yes, in order to be employed. Yes. So there were lots of things that we had to and have to look at. But economic models only give you the theoretical basis for what can work, but they all need to be carefully understood, first of all. They need to be compared with the environment and the situation in which they're going to be implemented. And this is where we need to do some work.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are speaking with Wilberne Persaud, and we're talking about a fantastic book, Jamaica, Post-Colonial Struggles for Dignity, Equity, and Development. We're absolutely delighted and been fascinated so far by what we have heard. As we look at some of your other columns, we want to take a look at the compilation. The book has 6 sections. Mr. Persaud, so you want to tell us about how you have divided up the different okay, sections of the book in an attempt to categorize what your commentary has been from these different columns.
Okay, well, you will see that it has 6 sections, and what we did was to put them in these categories in terms of subject and the area of investigation. I'll have to look at the book in order to give you the categories. The
I can categories. Help you with that. Well, Part one okay, has issues of post-colonial economic policies, a rather fascinating review. And Kenya, I just, since we have you on the spot, yes, which of the columns in that particular section do you consider to be your favorite?
Well, the one I consider to be my favorite is the one which indeed was not published by the Gleaner.
Which is why I asked. Tell us a little about that, because we would not have seen it elsewhere except in this book.
No, it wouldn't have been seen elsewhere. And when my colleague Cecilia Karsh-Brathwaite saw it. Oh, she was ecstatic. She read it and she said, "Oh, I see why they didn't publish it." Because what that column did, I used the work of George Lamming, novelist, and the work of Vivian Naipaul, novelist, writer. I'm an economist. Why do I use their work to try to explain what we had as industrialization? And I said, because their writing is simple, easy to follow, humorous, and sometimes they're laughing at the politicians. Naipaul speaks in his work, saying that he knows because I was the minister who cut the ribbon at the time. But anyway, what they were showing is that the industrialization of the British West Indies, which was set in motion in part because of Eric Williams. Eric Williams was in the late 1940s, early 1950s. He was in charge of research at the Anglo-American Caribbean Commission. Now, after the Second World War, Britain was no longer in charge of the world. And that hegemonic position was going over to the United States of America. The Caribbean, Commonwealth Caribbean, is at their doorstep, back door, front door, whatever you want to call it. We're right there. So they were concerned. And then you had the Cold War, when Winston Churchill came out with this thing as an iron curtain that has risen up between us, etc., etc. So they were trying to maintain the colonial influence and, in a sense, direct the way in which the Commonwealth Caribbean would develop. Williams was concerned. He looked at the people who came to work there and he said, these are guys that Britain is just giving, sure leave or whatever you want to call it. So he asked Arthur Lewis to come and look at what could be done. Arthur Lewis was using the work that he did before, economic development with unlimited supplies of labor, as well as Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico at the time was industrializing. And he said, listen, we have lots of labor that is unemployed.
Yes.
We speak English. We have the same legal system. We're at the doorstep of the most developed country in the world. Why can't we invite foreign investors to come and have them, give them good stuff? Industrial sites, water, electricity, a labor force which can do their work. But let them work with industries which will be infants for a while, but they can grow into full-fledged adults. That was the idea. At that time, the United Nations, it was agreed that there was something called the infant industry argument for protection. In other words, free trade was the ultimate goal. But if a country was underdeveloped, and if it could develop some activities, we would allow it to protect itself. That's what Lewis was talking about. As I said to my students at the time, it's as if you had an architect. Did I say this before?
Yes.
I did. Okay, don't let me repeat it. Yes, but that's it. But when the thing was,
important.
Yeah.
It is important, and it is worthwhile repeating. The other chapters or the other different segments in the book, we have the financial crisis and economic policy. We have productivity, technology, and innovation.
The financial crisis and economic policy.
Yes,
that's a significant portion of the material. Actually, that meltdown, as I call it, in another publication, it really retarded the growth of Jamaica. At that time, Jamaica and Jamaican capital and Jamaican entrepreneurship was on the way to great things.
And you're referring to here, this meltdown, you're referring here to the financial crisis meltdown.
Yes, the financial crisis
In
in,
which there
in
was
mid
a
1996.
yes, in which there was a collapse of the financial of the major, well, certainly the locally owned banking
Yes, and
institution.
that is quite instructive.
Yes.
It was the collapse of the indigenous or local financial services sector.
Yes.
We were creating merchant banks. Insurance companies left, the foreign insurance companies left, and they were taken over by local companies and local management. And we created some new banks. All of that was fantastic. The stock market was booming, and we were bringing more people who never before were involved into the system. But we really made some tremendous mistakes. And people began to buy into the notions of euphoria which they had. So for instance, Jamaica Mutual Life Assurance Society, they created a new head office next to the old one. Island Life Insurance Company created a big blue structure, which was built without having any pre-existing contracts for rentals, things like that. And there was this attitude of getting rich quickly, right away, so that there was an effort to bring value, which is just notional, into reality. And you ended up in a situation in which the real estate portfolios of these financial services firms, financial services industry, they were overcrowded, overwhelming the whole balance sheet. It was a real problem. And they offered all kinds of instruments to people without explaining what these instruments were. So when the crunch came, the government had to. If the government at the time did not, quote unquote, bail out the people, the objective was not to bail out the banks and financial institutions, because you had pension funds, you had insurance, and you had deposits.
Yes.
So the government of Jamaica, the Jamaican people, ended up with 140 billion, as far as I can remember, and that really led to a kind of destruction, which we're still seeing some of the remnants of it.
In those days, we're talking about banks like Century National. Yes, and there was a Jamaica Citizens Bank.
We're talking about Century National.
There was Workers Bank.
It was Workers Bank. National Commercial Bank was also involved too, because they had some terribly bad loans, and that is how
there was
Mr. Leachin,
Bank and a few others.
You had Island Victoria Bank, which was a joint venture between Victoria Mutual Building Society and Island Life Insurance Company. Well, you mentioned Workers Bank, which came out of the post office savings. I'm not remembering some of them now.
It's an interesting time. Now, given that the Jamaican Stock Exchange has now rallied, for want of a better word, and is now rated amongst the fastest growing, and certainly has attracted a lot of attention. Do you see any parallels in this current scenario, similar to what took place in the 1970s financial institution, where the stock market was
not
also
not 1970s? You mean the 1990s? No. Which is a good thing.
Yes.
It appears as if we have learned the lessons, and there is a level of prudential management, which is a good thing. Yeah. In relation to the stock exchange, for a stock exchange to play its most useful role in the development of your economy, It needs to be resilient. It needs to be broad and deep. And it needs to have a buy-in by as many people as possible. This is what was developing at that time.
Yes.
But,
Yes.
it fell by the wayside because of bad decisions and so on. There was also, sad to admit, significant levels of corruption.
As we take a gander through the other sections of the book, there's chapter part 5 I'm particularly interested in, which says Jamaican perceptions, plunder versus morality. I am fascinated by the topic, and I'm even more fascinated by the content. Talk to us a little bit about what are some of what drove you to that? What is
Plunder versus morality. You know of Port Royal, the Sin City, the earthquake, and in fact, Pirates of the Caribbean, the movie, that sort of thing. So, historically, there has been this notion of plunder, not only in Jamaica, the whole Caribbean, the whole Commonwealth Caribbean, the British West Indies, where sugar was king in the plantations. There was something that happened that you found the attorneys who would manage the estates for absentee owners. Sometimes they ended up owning the plantation. So we're talking about plunder operating at varying levels. So it just hit me that, we have this notion of plunder. So you go into a store and you buy an item. You take it home and you find that a button is missing. You take it back. You don't get it exchanged. You go into a store. This is the last one. It's stained. You ask them if they would reduce the price. No, they don't. So it's sort of
plunder, or is that the morality?
Well, the morality now is the one which says that you see after yourself and only yourself. But this is anathema to a significant part of the Jamaican society, the Jamaican culture.
Yes.
I was on a flight, maybe you read this, when I was on a flight to London, a long flight. So there were two ladies. One fell asleep. The other was across the aisle, not asleep. The stewardess, they were called that at the time, the hostess, today we would have to say, did not awake the one who was sleeping, so she had no meal. And this lady, oh man, she was so very upset, and she made it known, her Jamaican dialect, how the stewardess is wicked. She had to wake up so early. And I said to myself, look at this. She doesn't even know the person. No, that is the morality that I'm talking about.
Yes, yes.
Morality derives from human development.
Yes.
And we have found the sociobiologists who look at evolution, that in fact, cooperation is better for the gene pool than fighting. So that's where morality, I believe, comes from. Some people think it's from the Bible and from God, etc. It doesn't matter, but the morality does exist. And it exists even amongst the smallest children. In one of those columns, I also recount a situation in which I was left to babysit three young two of my children and another, and there were some sweets, and I just gave it to them, but it wasn't 6 sweets, so each could have 2. It was like 8. I don't remember the exact number. It's in the column, and these kids they're speaking, but they don't know the word. But they recognized and they said, it's not fair.
Yes.
So I was shocked. Where is this coming from? So I said, you know what? Sorry, it's my fault. 2 of those weren't few. 2 of those are for some other children who were coming. And they were happy.
Yes.
It was fair because each of them got 2 sweets.
Interesting story. There's a section also that you have which speaks to productivity, technology, and innovation. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because one of the columns that you have, I think you wrote that one in 2009, talks about transplanting technology, an imperative for Caribbean development. Share your thoughts on the narrative and noting, has anything changed in terms of the perspective since you wrote that in 2009?
Okay. Technology, its development, and what generates technological change has been and is still something that I'm really deeply interested in, and I follow it. I'm saddened by the fact that whenever we hear the word technology, we only think of computers and telecommunications, etc., when in fact, indeed, the first human being scratching some soil and understanding that he could plant a tree instead of having to run about and be the hunter-gatherer, that's the technology. Now, you will notice that technologies very often are expensive to create. And take the military-industrial complex of the USA, and take Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, etc. Now, none of them would have achieved anything like what they have achieved without the US government and the military-industrial complex. The internet is the result of the creation of mechanisms through which communications could take place for sensitive material. The GPS, all of these things. But the point is, technologies are fantastic because they tend to make productivity enhancements. They could either be productivity enhancements in the sense of using less labor, less material, producing it quicker. There is this thing in one of the descriptions of the Ford Motor Company. The assembly line, from whence does it come? And you see, in fact, someone went to was it a pork processing plant or a slaughterhouse or something? But here you began with a whole animal and you ended up with pieces. And this guy said, but listen, we could start with pieces and end up with a whole car. So you have the assembly line. The other thing is this, the Velcro, these things stick.
Yes.
It was someone who was walking in the Swiss Alps, I think. And he looked at the burrs on his pants, thought about it, and you get Velcro.
Yes.
The microwave oven. Guy's working on microwaves, the chocolate in his pocket, and it melts, so you can cook with it. So that it has to do with a keen sense of perception and also a drive to know things. And we make a serious error all the time. This thing about children being seen and not heard, and telling them no. We have to keep the children with this inquisitiveness. You need to know. Okay?
You need to know. I mean, we could spend another 2 hours or 3 hours just talking about how fascinating this book is. A fantastic collection, Jamaica, Post-Colonial Struggle for Dignity, Equity, and Development. And within those words, I mean, to unpack all of that could be, again, another book in the making.
Mm-hmm.
But as we seek to wrap up and on this part of our conversation, I have 1 or 2 more questions that about other.
By the way, there's one thing that I wanted to mention. You know that Jamaica had what we called what we called winter vegetables. And it was thought that what we were doing with winter vegetables and drip irrigation and so on were advanced technologies. No, they aren't. They aren't. They weren't.
Yes, I remember winter vegetables very well.
But you see that, and I mean, there's a column there. In fact, Mabel 10 was very, very helpful, good to me. She allowed me to go over all of the material that she had. Whereas the government one, Spring Plains,
yes,
it was like Fort Knox. You couldn't get anything.
yes.
And what we learned there was that the problem that existed there was that the market fluctuates. And if you're a small producer, you aren't going to be going into the market for the whole winter season, so that the fluctuations, you will work out. If you're small and you get into the market when it's low, you can lose your shirt.
Yes.
If you're a big producer, you're okay.
Yes.
That was one of the problems that Jamaica faced.
Again, a lot to unpack in your from this compilation, and a lot to learn, I might hasten to add. I do believe in one of the columns you had a recipe for good leadership. Which I think you publicly offered your own ideas as to what are some of the important constituents for good leadership, especially at the senior political level. The Caribbean, as you know, has gone through recent changes in terms of, or reinstated individuals. So let's say Jamaica, Trinidad, and Barbados has just had, in recent times, and Guyana, elections of heads of state. What advice would you give these heads of state of these small, not necessarily island nations, but small developing states, based on your recipe then? And does your recipe then apply to your recipe now?
Well, I think you're referring to the column that I wrote that is called Pardon My Intrusion, Mr. Golding, Unsolicited Advice.
Yes.
Yeah, I said that I think I had it here. I'm going to quote, insist on maximum spending on locally produced inputs. Ensure transparency, efficiency, and accountability. Hence, party affiliation becomes irrelevant. Optimize public transport. Make small, fuel-efficient vehicles available and cheap. Support domestic food crop production and rehabilitate our renowned Jamaican cattle breeds. I wanted to mention Jamaican cattle breeds. Oh, there's so much. Create legislation with requisite regulatory apparatus outlawing Ponzi Madoff type schemes. And this was the one that I think is so important. Share bad news openly with the people. We'll handle it. Contrary to Ray and his nephew's belief, Jamaica's spirit is not really Appleton. It's exemplified by Bob Marley, Bolt, the folks at the Halfway Tree Clock, Coronation Market, and Give Me Me Bit.
Yes, and Avery and nephew is no longer Jamaican, so.
Oh, it's no.
By Campari. Again, thank you so much for sharing. Tremendous insight. It's an exciting read. It's a read that anyone who's interested in an economic and historical perspective of Jamaica, and by extension, a bird's eye view into the Caribbean. The book certainly takes you on a global tour, because so many of your examples are drawn from the United Kingdom, referencing England, referencing Spain, other European countries. And so you get to travel the globe in just reading the chapters and from the pages of your book. And again, that presents a very fascinating and interesting contrast between how the rest of the world deals with very, very typical socioeconomic problems and how they are presented and handled in the Caribbean. And it's an insightful collection. I think in closing, I know you have a firm belief as an economist in data. Hardcore data is important to you. And the work of the late Carl Stone was certainly, I think, a very unique offering to the Jamaican data database in terms of information on voting statistic, something that the country had not been accustomed to before. It was pretty much very anecdotal, but he came with a very scientific approach to providing information about how people felt about their governments and their politics. Talk to us a little bit about your opinion of the value and importance of Dr. Stone's work, because again, focusing on the content of the columns, you draw a lot on data from the World Bank, the IDB, and various institutions across the globe that have a reputation for providing valuable and creditable data.
Well, I'm so glad you touched on that one. Carl Stone was a personal friend of mine. He was driven. He was on the hunt for knowledge and for the politics. He just loved what he did. He lived it. He was trained at UWI in the Department of Government and Michigan State, I think. I don't remember, but Michigan. And he was not a mathematician or a statistician. He was a political scientist. And he used the tools to do his polls. But he also used his own understanding of the Jamaican society. He would visit the bars, go to the Coronation Market, and so on. He was amongst the people. So there was a period in the 1970s with the People's National Party's claiming back something which they dealt with earlier on, democratic socialism. And at the time, their thing was, it was better must come, 1972. 10 years of independence and significant growth in gross domestic product, but tremendous unemployment and a lagging in the condition of the people. Economics has one problem. You have gross domestic product and you have national income, but you don't have a source. If you have a business, you have cost of goods sold and profits. In a country, you just have national income, it's just profits. That is foolishness. Okay, so the idea was that what we're going to do is try to, you go back to things that no bastard, not there again, all sorts of social and these things are intertwined.
Yes.
So you're going to lift the whole population.
Yes.
Now, this was indeed a challenge to the system as it was developing. So Jamaica became a kind of hotbed for both the left and the right. Everybody knows that both the CIA and the Cuban DJI was in Jamaica. Everybody knows that. And there were times when it wasn't clear. What does the population really think, really want? And if you were at the helm of either one of those groupings, you might think, everybody's with me. So I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. Jamaican democracy was indeed enhanced by the work that Carl Stone did. Because Carl Stone got the opinions of people. And opinion polling is not cheap. And in Jamaica, it's not easy to do because you can't go into Gimme Me Bit or Trelawney someplace and ask for a person by name and then ask his or her opinions. You're looking for trouble. Anecdotally, I'll tell you a situation that I fell into when I was doing some research work on the land lease program. We took a random sample, which meant we went to the Ministry of Agriculture and we got the actual names of these people, 12,000 people, and chose randomly by a computer. We chose 1,200 people to interview. We went into Hanover looking for somebody, let's say John Smith, myself and my research assistant, who is now an important man in the Department of Management Studies, we went to this bar. So we asked for this name. Let's say John Smith. I don't remember the name. Nobody knew him. Anyway, we said we had a drink. I used to drink beer at the time. I think I had a Red Stripe, and my guy had something else. And we were there chatting, and so, do you know, after about half an hour, the person identified himself. He was inside the bar. I just say that to tell you that it was not easy to do polls, because you had to do this thing as randomly as you could, but it was not a specific random sample that you generate in that way. Now,
and is it fair to say that again, culturally, people are suspicious of individual strange persons asking strange questions?
Asking personal questions.
Yes, you're right.
Seeking your ideas.
Yes.
Yes, but part of that is that it was entirely new.
New, yes.
But the other thing was that both sides, both political sides, would be upset with Stone depending on which way the was going. And he suffered some awful things, some of which I wouldn't even bother to discuss. Yes, but it was not easy for him. He was under threat as well.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And as I said, he and I were really good friends. I have about 3 columns, and I discussed some of the things that he would come to my yard in the morning and we would chat and so on. But in my view, Jamaica owes Carl Stone a debt of gratitude for the work that he did at the time and under the pressures that he faced. I really think so. Yeah. Is
there anybody who's comes to mind who's carrying on his work? Do you know?
Well, people are doing polls now. I think they are doing the polls. I don't think they put the political polls I'm talking about. I don't think they bring to bear the political acumen, the political knowledge, and the body of research that Stone brought to it. But they are competent.
They're competent.
And polling is a scientific thing, and political polls are not the only ones that are done.
Yes.
Many polls are done by the researchers. Tell
me what flavor drink they are to put out next. Should they add more sorrel to Red Stripe, etc.?
Yes.
Those kinds of things. Well, again, we have the pleasure of speaking with none other than Wilberne Persaud, author of the collection of selected columns between the period 1976 to 2013 that covers a very interesting and exciting time in Jamaica. The book, Jamaica, Post-Colonial Struggles for Dignity, Equity, and Development. It's a must read if you are interested in getting the truth and getting the facts about not only what the political landscape was like, what the economic landscape was like, and it's going to be an education for you as it relates to a lot of the civic and social activities that took place. You could tell from the pictures that were included in the book that Wilberne had a real wonderful time all across the country. And some of those pictures are very telling. It's an exciting, colorful, detailed account of a real world experience, a real national experience, a real authentic slice of Jamaica. A slice that everybody should want to have a piece of. So buy the book. Thank you, Wilberne Persaud.
Thank you so very much for having me.